Wynn Thomas is the production designer of the limited series Lawmen Reeves on Paramount Plus. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Wynn, I know you've done period pieces before in your career. What do you find most exciting about working with in a period piece? And had you done one of the Civil War era? I don't know if you've ever gone this far back in history, have you?
No, Bass Reeves was my very first Western. And the exciting part about working on the project was the fact that I got a chance to recreate this time period quite extensively. So, the exciting part for me is always doing the research. I mean, I really spend weeks and weeks and weeks sort of going back into time and through and using a variety of resources. A lot of people are on the internet nowadays, but I'm a little old fashioned. I live in New York City and I still go to the picture collection in New York and go through all the hundreds and hundreds of images that they have there. And then, I still go to the library and I still go to bookstores and I buy all these books and all that's very exciting for me. And it really is an opportunity to kind of take a trip back in time. And then the big challenge is how do you go ahead and recreate that time for the series that I was working on? So,
yeah, I wanted to ask you more about your research process. As you said, there are many photographs of this era. We have a couple of photographs of Bass Reeves himself. How helpful are those photos? And at what point do you have to take everything that you learned and then kind of put it aside and then dive into your own creative work? Like at what point do you feel like you've done enough research to then move on?
well, I think research does two things. It either confirms what you have in your head already, what you already know, or it inspires you. So for me, it's not like you go ahead and you do the research and you let it all go. You're looking to the research to provide you with solutions for the design. And very often, I will do my best. I will see an image, I'll see a photograph that I really love the feeling of it and I love the look of it. And I will, in many ways, try and either duplicate that or be inspired by it so that I'm taking architectural details or I'm trying to recreate a fabric that I see on the wall or a curtain or something. So I really do allow it to inspire me and to help shape my choices. Uh, but ultimately, once one sits down to design, everything that you've seen, everything that's inspiring you, will be filtered down to the piece of paper in which you're designing that set. So,
Yeah, so well said. I've asked everybody that I've spoken to on Lawmen Bass Reeves about their knowledge of Bass Reeves. How much did you know about this incredible historical figure before you heard about the project, joined the project? How familiar were you with this character?
well, I was aware of Bass Reeves uh, on a surface level. I think I knew of his existence, but I had no idea of the complexity or how full his life was, or all the things that he did in his life. I had no idea of his own personal history or the history of his family. So again, the exciting thing about this project was this was an opportunity to do a deep dive into the world of this man who I knew very little about. And I was very appreciative. The great thing about my job is that you get to go on these fantastic journeys on every single project that you do. And that's the great thing about storytelling and working in the film business. So I was really excited to go back and examine the world of Bass Reeves.
Let's talk about how you built that world out. I have to imagine one of the biggest tasks on this series was creating that frontier town. We've got
Oh, yeah.
a saloon, we've got so many wonderful establishments, and it's so vividly brought to life. How much time did you have to create that? And how exciting was it for you to kind of have the opportunity to build and construct this whole universe, the way you kind of saw it in your mind?
Well, we had two towns to recreate. One of them was supposed to be Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the other was a town called Chakotah, which is supposed to be in Indian territory. And it was a big challenge recreating both towns because we couldn't, normally what you do on these Westerns is you're shooting in a city that has an existing back lot, but we had to recreate them. So and on both cases, it took really months of location scouting to find two towns that would be the foundation in which we would build out these two towns. So with Chakotah, for example, Chakotah was a ghost town. This was a town called Strawn, and it was a ghost town. There was a few structures that were there that were all empty. There were 3 businesses that were functioning in the town: a dentist, a bank, and an antique store. But the rest of the buildings were empty. And the thing that was good about that for production was that it meant that I could come into the town and take over it and essentially turn it into a back lot. So, and that's essentially what we did. I mean, we came in, I built additional buildings to create alleys and to create structures that we needed. And there were so many empty buildings that I was able to go ahead and build sets in all of those empty structures. Therefore, the actors would be able to walk from the street into the actual structure. So I did this for the Bordello. There was a saloon that we did this for. And then there was another empty building that the second floor was completely empty. And I essentially turned all those empty rooms into different sets. So and that whole sequence in Chakotah was filled with action, and it was filled with shoot 'em ups, gun sequences. And the street, that town provided us with multiple solutions to get the actors in and to serve the action sequences in that town. So we essentially, I came into an empty place and turned it into a back lot, which really served our story very well. And with the Fort Smith scenario, we needed a town that was anchored by a period correct courthouse. And one of the things that I had to do when I was looking for that town was I had to find not only just the courthouse, but I also needed a town square that was not very busy, because what I knew I could not do was displace a lot of businesses. So we found a town called Snydersville, which had a great period courthouse and a couple of period correct buildings. And then I essentially came back in and refacaded over all of the first floors of all the other buildings. And we knew that we were going to visual effect everything above the first floor. And then we came in and we were able, because it was not a very busy town, we were able to close it down for a whole week of shooting, come in and put down all the period dirt, and really, again, turn it into a back lot for us for a whole week. But Fort Smith was done in a town called Snydersville. So each town provided a series of enormous challenges and a lot of work for the art department.
Yeah, it sounds extraordinary, the amount of work that in the end result is really spectacular. I have to ask you too, and I've asked everybody, or I've heard from everybody on the series, just how challenging the weather conditions were during production. How does that impact your work? I mean, like you said, you're coming into these spaces, you have a limited amount of time to transform, existing structures into period specific looks. What was combating the kind of weather conditions like for you on this?
Well, again, I mean, the weather conditions are well, they were problematic. The thing about Texas is that it experiences all the weather and extremes. But in the winter, I mean, unfortunately, almost all of our sets that we were building were outside. So, of course, what happens is when you're having, they would get, in Texas, we got 2 inches of ice, in which was, if you live in New York, 2 inches of ice is nothing. But when you live in Texas, 2 inches of ice will shut the whole town down, or everything around you down, which is what happened. So we were, it affects the building schedules. I mean, a lot of the areas we were shooting in, a lot of different ranches, and of course, if it's snow or if it's raining all the time, it turns your work area, into a mud pit, which of course stops you from doing the work. Now, the same thing also happened on the sets where they were shooting, because again, there was a whole wonderful outdoor sequence that we were shooting in a Native American community. And the horrifying thing about it is that the actors were dressed for spring. And of course, it was freezing outside. It was the dead of winter. So it was a real struggle for them to shoot that sequence and for the actors to stay warm. But weather it shut us down several times. So.
Let's
But we got
let's talk about one of the maybe interiors, which maybe is a salvation when you're working with those conditions, which is Bass and Jenny's home.
Yes.
We spend so much time there. It's a lovely kind of inviting space. And I wanted to ask, what did you want to communicate about those characters through the kind of environment that they built for themselves?
Right. Well, as you just stated, this would have been a home that, the story, my backstory was would have been a home that he had built for his family. So he had essentially built this for himself. And you see the house in two different phases. At the very beginning of the script of the series, Bass isn't doing very well. The family is struggling. So when you go into the home, it's minimally furnished, and it's furnished with odds and ends and things that don't look like they go together. And the whole idea is that what you're trying to communicate to the actors as well as to the audience is that this is a family that's struggling at this particular time, and it's just barely making ends meet. As the story progresses, obviously Bass, through his deputy work, starts to have a steady income. And so as a result, when you look at the series very carefully, you'll see that the furniture becomes a lot more sophisticated. Jenny's out, in addition to getting her piano, but she's also out she's furnishing her living room. She refurnishes there's a traditional sort of table in the living room eating area. So, and then you go upstairs, and what happened was the set decorating team really kind of came in and transformed it so that we were aware that the family had more money in the later half of the series. And it wasn't a point that was shouted out to the audience, but it was very subtle. And I think it's something that the viewer will see as they watch the series.
Yeah, I think it really does come across, as you're saying, it's subtle, but as you spend more time in the space, I think it really does come across. Let's talk about another home that I think is just fabulous in the way that it was set decorated and scouted, which is in the final episode, Esau Pierce's Manor plantation house, which is so grand and dark and obviously very disturbing environment. What was the inspiration for all those kind of details and flourishes in there? Because it feels like every piece that's in that large space has a story.
That's right. Well, the thing is, Esau is a kind of a strange, odd character with bizarre taste, but he also is a hunter of animals as well as a hunter of men. So what we wanted to do, I think the reveal in the story is, of course, that he is capturing all these black men and returning them to slavery. But I also wanted to get a sense that he is hunting everything around him. So as a result, everywhere you look in the interior of his house, there are heads of animals and throughout the entire house. And all of these are things that he has captured and killed and then turns into trophies for himself. And he would be perfectly happy to do that with human beings if he could. But obviously, that's not the story. But still, I wanted to capture that sense of a hunter going rogue. And, we had full-size buffalo or something in the house at some point or another. I mean, it was everything with Esau is to the extreme. And by making the choices that we made, my hope was that the viewer could get a sense of his strangeness and his bizarreness by the extent of the set decoration.
Yeah, absolutely. The set decoration, the coloring of the colors, all very evocative of his darkness too. It's beautifully done. Before I let you go, Wynn, I do want to ask you, do you have any favorite details on these different locations that you kind of thought of, that you put in, that maybe people notice at a glance, that you just are particularly proud of when you think back on the work? Are there particular sets, particular episodes, particular flourishes that you are particularly happy with?
I think a lot of people's favorite set was the bordello sequence in episode 4. And again, what the viewer can never appreciate is that we came into that. That was a space that was in Chakota, in the town of Chakota, and it was falling apart. It was just horrific when we found it. But we came back in there and we turned it into this sort of period correct bordello with lovely textured golden walls and beautiful paintings and beautiful lovely paintings of beautiful women up on the walls, and really transformed what was a horrific space into a lovely sort of bordello. And I think, especially for the people who were aware of what the space looked like before, it really was a shocking transformation, and I think people really loved it. So, they could also go there and gamble during breaks. So, yeah.
That's great. Wynn Thomas, congratulations on Lawmen Bass Reeves. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
All right. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much. Bye now.